name's Vanessa, and I will be refuting Amanda Arst's claim of fact, which is increasing federal funding for climate change research would benefit not only the United States, but also the world. As we all know, climate change is a long-term change in the Earth's overall temperature with massive and permanent ramifications. I do agree that with her on the fact that climate change resulting in global warming is negative for the world and for our health and our agriculture and everything. So I will actually be refuting the claims that she made, which I believe failed to provide evidence for her main claim. And her secondary claims were: one, if we don't invest in climate change now, the cost in the future could become dire. Her second one was: without proper research, pollinating animals and insects will become extinct. And the third one is: if nothing is done about climate change, we could go extinct. So my response to her claims is that they failed to provide evidence on how increasing federal funding for climate change will benefit the U.S. and the world. So for her first claim, her supporting claim, which is if we don't invest in climate change now, the cost in the future could become dire. Her supporting claim fails to provide how it will decrease the future costs, what will be the resulting cost if we don't do any research, and how much we will save if we do fund more research. She did state that if we switch from fossil fuels to low carbon sources, it will cost us about $44 trillion, which seems like a lot of money already. So I feel like either way, we will be spending a lot of money if we fund research now or if we don't. The thing that I think would be that we should focus on more is the effects, not so much how much money needs to be spent, but like the effect of like not doing anything about it. According to the Congressional Budget Office, from 1998 to 2009, the U.S. government appropriated $99 billion for work related to climate change, and $35.7 billion, which was 36% of that total, came as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. According to CNSnews.com, President Obama pledged $3 billion to the GCF, which is a global climate fund, over 4 years, and with a first installment, and also $500 million was paid last March. And as of then, 40 governments have pledged a total of $10 billion to the United Nations GCF. So how much more do we need to spend on research before we can actually figure out what needs to be done? And how much funding is being provided by other nations that are producing just as much CO2 emissions? She claims that we need to start investing more funds into research, but I believe we need to start funding more programs instead of research. We need to actually start doing something about it, which will reduce the production of CO2 emissions. The secondary claim, or her second claim, was without proper research, pollinating animals and insects will become extinct. The supporting claim that she gave fails to provide proper cause and effect connection, I believe. Improper research will not cause pollinating animals to go extinct. Human activity causes climate change and pollution, which causes pollinating animals to go extinct. So there is more than enough research that proves human activity and the increase of pollution and climate change will lead to devastating results. But what we actually need to do to prevent this effect is we need to focus on other things like what we can do, like ban most of the dangerous pesticides, which harms these pollinating animals, protecting their habitat, and also restoring ecological agriculture. Her third claim, which is if nothing is done about climate change, we could go extinct. The third claim, she states that if nothing is done about climate change, we'll go extinct, and this is obvious to everyone. I still don't see a connection with what this claim has to do with federal funding. It's obvious to everyone that, you know, if we don't do anything about it, it's gonna harm us. And since she's just simply saying that if nothing is done, we'll become extinct. But her main claim is about increasing federal funding, and I just don't really see the connection there. It's just more of like a consequence, I guess. This secondary claim, or since global warming is a global issue, it has caught the attention of more and more people, causing movements to support long-lasting solutions. In her claim, she's pretty much assuming that nothing's being done, but treaties such as the Kyoto Summit and the International Summit in Rio have already proposed bills for long-term policy on climate change and prevention, according to preventclimatechange.org. And more people are becoming aware and are advocating for the nations and for governments to help reduce CO2 emissions. And there's still a lot that we can do on an individual basis to help combat the effects of climate change. Small change individually equates to a large scale change collectively. So turning around some of our bad habits can also make a lasting difference. So in conclusion, I do agree with her with the fact that global warming has a negative effect on us, but I believe that her supporting claims had no connection with her main claim, which was increasing federal funding and how it would benefit the US and the world.
All right. The argument on the first point, I think, is the stuff that is the clearest. You basically say, we don't know how much money we need. We don't know why the amount of money we've given so far is inadequate, and there's money coming from other areas. Those claims, I think, need to be phrased as claims. I figured out that those are the inferences that you're making there, but sometimes you're presenting the evidence without giving us a clear declarative statement on those particular points, and those are the points that you're making. So I think they would go a little bit quicker if you use the declarative statements to make those claims, as opposed to kind of working backwards from the evidence to the claim. The general challenge on that point, I think, is the whole crux of your argument, really. That's what it comes down to. And at the end, you're kind of just repeating that same point. So you could probably edit that down quite a bit. On the pollinating animals issue, I think the inference that you're trying to suggest here is that there are a variety of human activities that create the problems for these pollinating animals, and that climate change is at best, or I should say at worst, one of them, but it may not be the most important one. And I think that that's a reasonable claim to make, but you don't say it that way. I'm kind of having to figure out that that's the point that you're making. And once again, I think you need a declarative sentence to make that particular position clear. The idea that there might be related to pesticides or habitat destruction, I think that's a good argument. It would be a better argument if you had some evidence that suggested that it was connected to that. I don't remember what the advocates' information was, except it did seem to me that they suggested it was migratory patterns that were affected by, climate issues. So, if you're going to argue a counterclaim or a counter causality here, you need to have some evidence on that counter causality. I did think at the end that there was a place where you had an interesting counter argument here. Kyoto, Rio. I'm surprised you didn't also mention the Paris treaties that suggest that we are doing things about this. It's not as if we are neglecting this particular point. The question becomes, though, how much money do we need to spend, and is there any demonstration that spending the money is going to make a difference? It might be much more appropriate for us to address this issue, like you suggested, on the individual level, instead of relying on additional research issues. And then you kind of get into this other argument about, global climate change is a bad thing. Everybody agrees on that, which is not where the dispute is, at least according to your first point. All right, thank you.